After stumbling upon a hidden key in his basement, a 17-year-old boy uncovers layers of dark family secrets, starting with a missing uncle and a sealed trust fund. What begins as a search for answers unravels a decades-old cover-up, leads to shocking DNA revelations, and changes the lives of everyone involved. Alongside his adopted younger brother and a long-lost cousin, the narrator fights to break the cycle of silence, expose the truth, and build something better from the ruins. I always thought my family was just a little old-fashioned. You know, the type that reuses foil, collects rainwater in buckets, and insists on keeping the thermostat at 62, even in the dead of winter. My dad used to say, "Waste not, want not," like it was our family motto. I didn't question it. Not until the week before my 17th birthday. That's when I found the key. It was stuck behind the dryer in our freezing basement, wedged between a crack in the cement wall and the rusty back panel. I was only down there trying to reset the breaker after my little brother popped the toaster and microwave at the same time. When I reached back to feel for the switch, my fingers brushed something cold and metallic. At first, I thought it was just an old bolt or something. But when I pulled it out and cleaned it off on my shirt, I saw it was a key. A real, old-school brass key. And it looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I didn't think much of it until I noticed something weird about the far wall. One of the cinder blocks near the floor was a slightly different shade of gray. I don't know what came over me, but I tapped it. Hello. My heart did this little flutter thing. I pushed on it, and to my shock, the block shifted. Not a lot, just enough to reveal a narrow crack. That's when I realized this key was no accident. It belonged to something. Over the next 3 days, I became obsessed. I searched every corner of that basement, tapping walls, pulling at pipes, crawling behind shelves. It was stupid, really. I mean, we were barely scraping by. Half the time, we didn't even have hot water, and here I was playing detective. But then, on Friday night, after my parents went to bed, I noticed the wall panel under the stairs looked odd, like it had been unscrewed and reattached too many times. I grabbed Dad's toolbox, unscrewed the corners, and pulled it off. Behind it was a small metal door. No label, no handle, just a keyhole, right in the center. My hand was shaking when I slid the brass key in. It clicked, smooth as butter, and the door creaked open. Inside was a dusty, airtight box full of paperwork. Bank records, letters, photos. At first, I didn't understand any of it. But the deeper I dug, the clearer it became. My family had once been rich. Not just comfortable, or doing okay. I'm talking trust fund rich. My grandfather owned a construction company that built half the strip malls and highways in the state. And apparently, when he died, he left everything, millions of dollars, in a trust for my dad. Except here's the twist, my dad never claimed it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would someone walk away from that kind of money, especially when we were barely getting by? I mean, we ate rice and beans 5 nights a week. I wore the same coat for 3 winters straight. We weren't just frugal, we were poor. And all this time, my dad had access to a fortune? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at all those papers, trying to understand. Was it guilt? Was there a catch? Did my mom know? And if so, why did she act like we were one step away from living in our car? The next morning, I confronted my mom. She froze when I mentioned the key. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't deny it. She just whispered, "You weren't supposed to know." That's when things spiraled. My dad stormed into the room 10 minutes later, face red, eyes wild. And for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in him. Not anger, fear. He sat me down and told me the truth. Or at least, his version of it. According to him, the money came with conditions. The trust was tied up in legal nonsense. He'd have to sign over power of attorney to some shady cousin who'd mismanaged other family assets. My dad claimed he walked away to protect us. He said the money was cursed, that it ruined his siblings, that he wanted us to live a real life. But I couldn't buy that. I mean, what kind of real life includes hiding the fact that your kids have been going to school with holes in their shoes? And that's when I started looking deeper. I started digging into property records, searching old news clippings, even asking questions at school. I found out my dad's brother, Uncle Curtis, had mysteriously disappeared 20 years ago. Like, vanished off the map. Everyone assumed he skipped town or got into something illegal. But when I cross-checked the dates, something didn't add up. Uncle Curtis vanished the same week the trust was created. And I wasn't the only one asking questions anymore. My little brother, Jamie, had overheard our conversation. He was only 11, but smart as a whip. He started snooping too. What we uncovered next changed everything. Jamie was too young to fully grasp the weight of what we'd found, but his curiosity kicked into overdrive. He's the kind of kid who dissects old radios for fun and rewires remote control cars just to see if he can make them faster. So when he got involved, I knew things were about to get even stranger. He managed to get into Dad's locked filing cabinet. Don't ask me how, I didn't want to know. But one night, he came into my room holding a yellowing envelope with shaky hands. "Don't freak out," he whispered, "but I think Dad's been lying about Uncle Curtis." Inside the envelope were copies of police reports. Not about a disappearance, about a missing persons investigation that had been closed abruptly. Curtis hadn't just skipped town. He'd been reported missing by a friend after not showing up to a job site. But after only a week, the case was marked, resolved, family request. No explanation, no follow-up. And the date of resolution? The same day the trust fund was activated. That's when I knew something way deeper was going on. This wasn't just about money or pride. Something had happened back then, something bad. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I looked at my dad, the more I started to notice little things. The way he always locked the basement door after dark. The way he kept that one storage box in the attic nailed shut. The way his hands trembled when he talked about the past. I needed answers. Real ones. So I went to the only person outside the family who might know. My Grandma Jean. She lived in a tiny nursing home 2 towns over, the kind that smells like boiled vegetables and bleach. She wasn't really all there anymore. Half the time she thought I was my dad. But that day, something must have clicked, because when I mentioned Curtis, her eyes sharpened. He was the smart one, she muttered. Always asking questions. Never knew when to stop. I asked her what she meant, but she just stared past me and whispered, "Your father said it was an accident. But accidents don't bury themselves, do they?" Chills ran down my spine. I pushed her, gently, asking what kind of accident. But she got quiet after that. Her nurse said that was the most she'd spoken in weeks. But it was enough. I started to think the trust fund wasn't just the result of some legal setup. What if it was hush money? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that box in the attic. The one my dad always said was full of old tax stuff. I waited until the house was dead quiet, then climbed up there with a crowbar. My hands were shaking the whole time. The box was heavier than I expected. The nails were old, but stubborn. When I finally cracked it open, I didn't find tax papers. I found clothes. Men's clothes. Covered in old, crusted dirt. A pair of boots with dried something on them. And tucked in the pocket of one of the jackets, a driver's license. Curtis's license. I sat there, staring at it in the dim attic light, my mind racing. What was this doing in our house? Why was it hidden? And why, after all these years, had nobody found it? Unless they already knew it was there. I almost dropped the license when I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was Dad. He didn't say anything when he saw me with the box. He just stood there, eyes dark, face unreadable. For a moment, I thought he was going to lunge at me. But instead, he sat down on the attic floor and let out a long, shaky breath. "I didn't kill him," he said quietly. "But I might as well have." He told me everything. Curtis had been the one who found out their dad, my grandfather, was funneling money from the business, using shady labor, and cutting deals with corrupt local officials. When Curtis threatened to go public, Grandpa flipped. Said he'd cut him out of the company and disown him from the will. They fought, hard. One night, Curtis showed up drunk, ranting about blowing the whole thing wide open. He never made it home. Dad swore he didn't hurt him, but he also admitted he didn't stop what happened next. Grandpa paid someone off. Curtis was disappeared, and Dad, young, scared, and angry, was told to keep his mouth shut. In exchange, the company became his. But the guilt ate away at him. So when Grandpa died and left the trust, Dad decided not to take it. He walked away from everything, hoping it would somehow balance the scales. But it didn't. It just made our lives miserable. And now, I had to decide what to do with everything I knew. I could go to the police. Maybe there was still something they could do. I could expose the family business, though by now it was long shut down. Or, I could do what Dad did. Keep the secrets. Protect the family. That night, I sat in my room with the dusty box at my feet, the license in my hand, and a choice that felt way too big for a 17-year-old kid. That's when Jamie knocked on my door. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked, voice small. I looked at him for a long time, and then I made up my mind. I told Jamie we'd be okay, but I didn't really believe it. Not yet. The next morning, I skipped school. I took the dusty box, the license, and all the documents I'd found and drove to the county records office. I figured if I was going to make a move, I needed more than guilt and theories. I needed proof. I spent hours digging through files, construction permits, court records, old employee logs from the company my grandfather had run. That's when I found it, buried in a dusty box labeled Miscellaneous Archives, a signed affidavit from one of the subcontractors. It was a sworn statement that he had been told to look the other way on an accident at a build site. The location? An old overpass project in 2003. The same month Curtis disappeared. My stomach dropped. I looked up the site. It had been condemned 2 years ago due to structural instability. It wasn't hard to put 2 and 2 together. Curtis didn't vanish. He was buried in concrete. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the sheriff's office. But the other part? The part that saw how broken my dad already was? That part hesitated. So instead, I confronted him again. I told him everything I'd found. Showed him the affidavit. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. "They told me it was an accident," he said, barely able to speak. "That he fell. That it was too late. They said if I said anything, I'd go down too." And then he said something I didn't expect. "I want to turn myself in." That night, he walked into the police station and told them what he knew. Everything. Of course, the story made the local news. Cold case breaks open after nearly 2 decades. The site was excavated. Human remains were recovered. DNA confirmed it was Uncle Curtis. My dad was arrested, though the charges weren't for murder, more like obstruction and failure to report. My mom was furious. Not because of the crime, but because he dragged the whole thing back into the light. "We were safe," she said. "We had a life." But it was a lie. We never had a real life. Just shadows and silence. Things got worse before they got better. The media camped outside our house. Jamie was bullied at school. My mom stopped talking to me entirely. For a while, it felt like I'd shattered what little we had left. But then, out of nowhere, I got a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer. Apparently, when my dad came clean, it triggered a clause in the trust, one that Curtis had written before he died. He must have known things could go sideways, because he added a stipulation. If foul play was ever proven, the trust would bypass everyone else in the family and go directly to the next of kin who came forward with the truth. That person was me. I stared at the letter, stunned. 17 years old, and I now had access to millions. You'd think I'd be thrilled, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a weight. I didn't tell Jamie right away. I didn't even tell my mom. I just sat with it for a few days, trying to figure out what this money meant. It couldn't bring Curtis back. It couldn't undo what happened. And it certainly couldn't fix our family. But maybe, just maybe, it could build something better. The first thing I did was set up a college fund for Jamie. Then I paid off all the bills. Quietly, without drama. I made repairs to the house, got the heater working, replaced the cracked windows in the basement. Small things. Quiet victories. Eventually, I sat my mom down and told her. She didn't say much at first, just looked out the window and nodded. After a long pause, she said, "Your father loved his brother, even if he didn't know how to show it." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. We're still not close. I don't know if we ever will be. Some cracks don't seal, no matter how much time passes. But then came the twist I never saw coming. A few weeks later, I got another letter. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from a man named Andrew. He claimed to be Curtis's son. I thought it was a scam. But when I had the lawyer look into it, it checked out. Curtis had a girlfriend before he disappeared. She was pregnant and never told anyone. That meant I wasn't the only rightful heir. And under the terms of the trust, I was now legally obligated to split the inheritance with him. I didn't hesitate. I asked to meet him in person. Andrew showed up at a diner just outside of town. He looked a lot like me. Same eyes, same cautious smile. When I handed him a copy of the letter and the trust information, he just looked down and said, "Thank you." We didn't talk about money. We talked about family, about what could have been. He told me he grew up thinking his dad abandoned him. His mom never remarried. Worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. And when he turned 18, he started digging. Spent years trying to find out what happened. I told him what I knew. The whole story. He didn't cry, but I could see it in his face, how much it hurt, and how much it mattered to finally know the truth. Before we left, I asked him one last question. What would you do with it? The money, I mean. He didn't even blink. Help someone who needs it more than me. That's when I knew we were family. For the first time in a long while, things started to feel steady. Jamie was doing better at school. My mom, though still distant, stopped giving me that hollow stare every time we crossed paths. She even made dinner a couple times, like real dinner, with sides and everything. The kind of meals we hadn't had since I was a kid. I was still meeting with Andrew from time to time. We didn't hang out like best friends or anything, but we kept in touch. We talked about our dads, about what we missed, and what we wished we'd known sooner. Sharing the inheritance was never an issue. We agreed that what we'd both inherited wasn't just money. It was the aftermath of silence, secrets, and choices made long ago. But just as the dust was starting to settle, I stumbled on something that stirred it all back up. It happened the day we cleared out the garage. Mom wanted to donate the junk we'd piled up over the years. Old clothes, broken furniture, boxes of who knows what. I was dragging a heavy chest out of the corner when something caught my eye. It was a folder, faded blue, wedged behind a stack of paint cans. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was just more of Dad's old paperwork. But then I saw the date on the corner, 2018. That wasn't old. I opened it. Inside were adoption papers. Recent ones. My mom's name was on them. And so was Jamie's. I froze. Everything around me went quiet, like the world sucked all the sound out just to let this moment hit me harder. I flipped through the rest of the documents, my hands trembling. There were letters from a lawyer, court filings, a signed relinquishment form from someone named Angela Rayburn, Jamie's birth mother. That's when it clicked. Jamie wasn't just my little brother. He was adopted. And nobody ever told me. The room felt smaller. My skin was hot. I walked back into the house, folder in hand, and dropped it on the kitchen table in front of my mom. "What is this?" She didn't even look surprised. Just tired. "I was going to tell you," she said. Eventually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You mean all this time, Dad was hiding the truth about Uncle Curtis, and you were hiding this?" She sat down slowly and folded her hands. "Jamie was my cousin's son. Angela had him young. She couldn't handle it. Got into drugs. Bounced between shelters. When she finally hit rock bottom, she came to us. Your father, he didn't want to take him in at first. We could barely feed ourselves, but I couldn't turn him away." I sank into the chair opposite her, feeling like the ground was shifting under me. "Why keep it a secret?" She sighed. "Because he became ours. We thought, if we just raised him like he was your brother, it would be easier. Simpler. But nothing about our life has ever been simple." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't that I loved Jamie any less. If anything, knowing how much he'd already been through made me love him more. But I hated that no one trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Later that night, I sat Jamie down and told him everything, gently. He didn't cry. He didn't freak out. He just looked at me with those big eyes and asked, "So does that mean I don't belong here?" And man, that hit me hard. I hugged him tighter than I ever had. "You belong here more than anything," I said. "You're my brother. That doesn't change." We cried together after that. Quiet tears. Cleansing ones. And that's when I knew what I wanted to do with the rest of the inheritance. We'd gotten our lives back, but I wanted to do something for other kids like Jamie. Ones who slipped through the cracks. kids without a voice. So I used the money to start something new, a scholarship fund and a small nonprofit that helped kids aging out of the system, teens who'd grown up bouncing from home to home, often ending up on the street. Andrew helped too. He said it felt like something his dad would have done if he'd had the chance. We named the organization after Curtis. It felt right. Mom started volunteering with us after a while. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was her way of making peace. Either way, she showed up. Consistently. Quietly. And that mattered more than any apology. Dad, meanwhile, got a reduced sentence due to his cooperation. He served a year in county and got out with probation. He wasn't the same afterward. Slower. Grayer. But he seemed lighter, like telling the truth had finally let him breathe. We talked sometimes. Not often, but enough. The last time we spoke, he told me, "You did what I couldn't. You broke the chain." I think that was his way of saying sorry. Jamie's doing great now. He's on the robotics team, has a small group of friends, and he laughs a lot more than he used to. His nightmares stopped too. As for me, I don't think I'll ever fully get past the things we went through. But I found a kind of peace in helping others find their way out of the dark. And in the quiet moments, when the house is calm and the weight isn't so heavy. I remember something Grandma Jean said that day in the nursing home. Accidents don't bury themselves. She was right. But sometimes, if you dig deep enough, truths can rise again. 6 months passed. The nonprofit, Curtis House, started getting attention. Local news ran a feature on us. Donations trickled in. A few of the teens we helped even stuck around as volunteers. It felt like something real was growing out of everything we'd lost. Andrew and I had grown closer too. I called him my cousin when I introduced him, even though we were technically just the sons of brothers who never got to reconcile. But emotionally, he felt like blood. One evening, we were sorting through applications for a grant when Andrew got quiet. Just sat there staring at one of the names on the list. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked up, eyes sharp. "Do you recognize this name?" I looked, Lena C. Rayburn. It didn't click right away. Then I blinked. Rayburn. That was the last name of Jamie's birth mom, Angela Rayburn. "Is that?" I started. Andrew nodded slowly. "My mom's maiden name was Rayburn too." We stared at each other for a long time. "Wait, are you saying Jamie's mom and your mom might be sisters?" he finished. He pulled out his phone and started digging through old photos. I ran to get the file my mom kept with the adoption records. We spent hours comparing timelines, birthplaces, names. It didn't take long to confirm it. Angela Rayburn and Andrew's mom, Melissa Rayburn, were sisters, which meant Jamie was Andrew's cousin, and I was now raising the cousin of my cousin as my brother. That made my head spin, but it also explained something that had never made sense. Why Angela had come to our family for help. Why she'd trusted my mom, of all people, to take in her son. She'd known about the Curtis connection. Maybe she even hoped Jamie would be safe with someone tied to Andrew's bloodline. And now, 2 decades later, here we were, all of us connected by threads we hadn't even known were there. I told Jamie about it the next day. I half expected him to be overwhelmed, but he grinned wide and said, "So that means I have 2 big brothers now." It broke me a little, in the best way. Later that week, we got a letter from Angela. She'd been in rehab for the past year, apparently sober and staying clean. She'd heard about the nonprofit and reached out through a caseworker. She didn't ask for anything. Just wrote to say she was proud of Jamie and grateful we gave him a life she couldn't. I let Jamie decide whether to write back. He did. They exchanged a few letters. Nothing too emotional. Just updates, photos, drawings. Steps towards something healing. But the more I learned about Angela, the more something else gnawed at me. According to her file, she wasn't just battling addiction. She'd also been in and out of a group home as a teen. That stuck with me. I asked Mom if she remembered Angela staying with us before Jamie was born. She got real quiet. "She didn't stay with us," she said. "But she did stay nearby." "Where?" "Next door." That stopped me cold. Next door? The McCulloughs had lived there when I was a kid. They were strange, kept to themselves. The old man had a long beard and a limp, and I always thought the wife was afraid of him. But I never really thought about it much. Until Mom said something that made my blood run cold. She stayed with the McCulloughs because her mother was dating the man who lived there. We didn't find out until later he had a record. "A record?" I asked. "For what?" Mom didn't answer, but I knew. I pulled the name from the county records. Joseph McCullough. Did a 6-year stint in state prison. Charges sealed because of his plea deal. But buried in a civil filing was enough detail to piece it together. He'd been charged for hurting 2 girls under the age of 15. One of them was Angela. I felt sick. Angela wasn't just a struggling mom who made bad choices. She was a victim long before she became a parent. And that meant Jamie was born into trauma no one had told me about. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when I found an old photo, one that Andrew had shown me months ago. It was a faded picture of his mom, Melissa, standing in front of a weathered fence with her arm around a man. The man? Joseph McCullough. Andrew and I sat in stunned silence as we put the pieces together. "Wait," he said. "That's not possible. My mom wouldn't. She couldn't have." But the photo didn't lie. Joseph McCullough was Angela's stepfather, and also Melissa's ex-boyfriend. It hit us both at once. Andrew and Jamie weren't just cousins. They might have shared a father. And that man might have been Joseph. That revelation hit like a sledgehammer. If it was true, everything got more complicated, more painful. Suddenly, the money, the trust, the nonprofit, it all felt like it was built on a foundation of suffering that stretched back further than we ever imagined. We didn't tell Jamie. Not yet. He was doing well, finally smiling again. We agreed to wait, to get more answers, to be sure. But deep down, I knew. The scars in our family ran deeper than we ever thought. And there were still more secrets to unearth. Andrew and I couldn't ignore it. We spent weeks trying to confirm what we feared. If Joseph McCullough had fathered both Angela and Melissa's children, it meant he was the biological father of both Jamie and Andrew. DNA tests weren't easy to get. We didn't want to alarm Jamie, and Melissa had passed away years earlier, so we couldn't test her. But Andrew managed to track down an old half-brother from Melissa's side, and we got a sample. When the results came in, I had to sit down. A 99.4% chance of shared paternity between Jamie and Andrew. Joseph McCullough, the man who'd abused Angela, manipulated Melissa, and lived right next door to us for a chunk of our childhood, was their father. Neither of them had ever known. Andrew took it hard. Really hard. He stopped answering texts for a while. Missed a few meetings. Said he needed space. I understood. I was barely sleeping myself. Jamie, though, he was still innocent in all of this. Still laughing at cartoons, asking questions about space, and begging for pancakes every Sunday morning. I wasn't ready to shatter that light, but I knew we couldn't keep it from him forever. So I talked to a therapist, someone who worked with adopted kids and teens. She helped me come up with a plan. How to approach it. When. What to say. What not to say. When the day came, I sat Jamie down at the kitchen table, the same one where I discovered so many of our family's secrets, and told him, gently, that we'd learn more about his birth family. He listened quietly, nodding, and then he asked the one question I'd been dreading. Was he a bad man? I took a breath. Yeah, buddy, he was. Jamie's eyes watered a little, but he didn't cry. He just leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, but I'm not like him, right? And that broke me. I pulled him close. No, you're nothing like him. You're kind, you're strong, and you're ours. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. The past may shape us, but it doesn't define us. We are not the people who hurt us. We're the ones who survived. Andrew came back around after a while. He started going to therapy too. We spent long nights talking about how we'd move forward. We were tired of being defined by what was done to us, by secrets, pain, or money. We wanted to build something. So we expanded Curtis House. We started a program for children of incarcerated parents. Then we added trauma counseling. Then transitional housing. Word spread. Volunteers came in. Former residents came back to mentor others. The ripple kept growing. It didn't fix everything, but it mattered. As for the trust fund, it was nearly gone by the time I turned 20. Not from waste, but from building, supporting, and investing in something bigger than ourselves. And I don't regret a single penny. Years later, I found myself back in that cold basement where it all began. The place where I found the key. I stood there, staring at the crack in the wall, remembering how it all started. Funny thing is, there's still a part of me that believes that key found me. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if I'd never reached back behind that dryer. If I'd just flipped the breaker, gone back upstairs, and stayed in the dark, like my parents had for so long. But then I remember what came out of that moment. The truth, the healing, the people we saved because of it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Jamie's in college now, engineering major, just like he always dreamed. He volunteers at Curtis House during breaks. Andrew runs operations full-time. He even met someone. They're expecting their first child. And me? I write. I speak at conferences. I share our story, not because I want sympathy, but because I want people to know, you can break the cycle. You can dig through the secrets and come out the other side. Sometimes the truth is buried deep. And sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones keeping it hidden. But the truth? It always finds a way. I used to think the worst thing a family could do was fall apart. Now I know it's worse to stay together for all the wrong reasons. Secrets, guilt, silence. Those things don't just sit quietly in the attic or the basement. They leak into everything. Your meals, your memories, your sense of safety. And they grow, even when you pretend not to see them. But healing? That grows too. Jamie came home last winter break looking taller, more confident, more himself. He got a tattoo, small, just below his wrist. It was a key. Simple. Brass-colored ink. When I asked about it, he just smiled and said, thought it was time I stopped being scared of what unlocked everything. I couldn't argue with that. Mom still lives in the house. She's quieter these days, but softer. She stopped pretending everything was fine. That alone was a victory. Every Sunday, she bakes bread for the local shelter, something she started doing without being asked. I think it's her way of giving back, piece by piece. Dad never really bounced back from his time inside, but he writes me letters every month. No big updates. Just little things, memories, apologies, poems he scribbles late at night. I keep them all in a box under my bed. The box that used to hold Curtis's license now holds my father's words. Funny how things come full circle. Andrew and I became something like brothers. Not by blood, not exactly, but by battle. We went through the fire together and came out stronger on the other side. Some days we argue. Other days we finish each other's sentences. But every day, we build something. And Curtis House. It's more than a nonprofit now. It's a movement. We've opened branches in 3 cities. We've helped over 500 young people find housing, mentorship, and hope. I gave my 20s to this work, and I'd give my 30s too. I thought the final chapter had already been written. Until I got a letter. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an old photo, one I'd never seen before. The photo was of my grandfather, Curtis, and someone else. A woman, standing outside a construction site. Written on the back, she knew the truth. Find her. My heart skipped. I stared at the handwriting. It wasn't Andrew's. Wasn't Dad's. Wasn't even Grandma Jean's. But I recognized it. It was Curtis's. He must have written it before everything happened, before he vanished. I flipped the page over. There was a name scribbled at the bottom, Ruth Ainsley. That name didn't mean anything to me at first. But a few calls later, I learned she was a former secretary at the construction company, my grandfather's company. She'd retired years ago and moved to Oregon. I wasn't sure why it mattered now, after everything. But something in my gut told me to follow through. I flew out there. Took a cab to a quiet neighborhood where every house had wind chimes and flower beds. When I knocked, a frail woman with a cane opened the door. She looked at me like she'd been expecting me. "You're his boy, aren't you?" she asked. "Curtis's nephew." I nodded slowly. She motioned me in, and what she told me in the next hour turned everything I thought I knew on its head. Curtis didn't just threaten to expose the corruption in the company. He already had. He'd sent documents to a local journalist, proof of tax fraud, unpermitted sites, and bribery. And he didn't vanish because he was scared. He vanished because he was getting too close to something bigger. A political cover-up. One that involved city officials, law enforcement, and a development project that had ties all the way up to the state senate. He told me if anything happened to him, someone would come, Ruth said. He said to give them this. She handed me a flash drive, old, dusty, wrapped in a rubber band. I plugged it in that night in my hotel room. It was all there. Scans, emails, voice recordings, everything Curtis had gathered. Everything my grandfather had tried to bury, literally. It hit me like a freight train. Curtis hadn't just died trying to protect the truth. He died for it. And now I had the choice to finish what he started. I sat on it for a week. Went back home. Thought long and hard. Then, I made copies and sent them to 3 investigative reporters. Within a month, it hit the news. Decades-old cover-up unraveled by victim's family member. Lawsuits. Resignations. Headlines. Curtis's name was cleared. Not just inside our house, but everywhere. Jamie cried when he saw the first article. Andrew gave a speech at one of our centers that ended with a standing ovation. And me? I went back to the basement one last time. I placed a plaque on that old wall behind the dryer. Just a small one. It reads, "To Curtis, the man who spoke the truth, even when no one listened." I used to think stories had clear endings. That you could draw a line under the past, stamp it shut, and move on. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't offer clean exits. It hands you messy middles, scars you carry, and sometimes, just sometimes, a little hope to go with it. It's been 5 years since I found the key. 5 years since that cold basement opened the door to everything. So much has changed. Jamie graduated college last month. Walked across that stage with his head high and a crowd cheering him on. He's got a job lined up designing solar tech for low-income communities. Said he wants to help families like ours. Ones that grew up cold in more ways than one. He still calls me his brother. Still makes pancakes every Sunday. And now, when he looks in the mirror, I think he finally sees someone worth loving. Andrew's married now. He and his husband adopted a little girl last year. They named her Hope. She's got a giggle that could light up a whole city block, and every time I visit, she runs straight to me yelling, "Uncle." Sometimes I wonder if Curtis would have smiled at that. I think he would have. Curtis' house has grown bigger than we ever imagined. We've got staff, counselors, partners across the country. But it still feels like home. We build it on something real, truth, grief, and second chances. That foundation holds stronger than money ever could. Mom volunteers full-time now. She bakes. She listens. Sometimes she leads group talks for other women who lived with secrets too long. She doesn't talk much about the past. But every once in a while, she squeezes my hand and whispers, "Thank you for not letting it stay buried." And Dad, he passed away 2 months ago. Peacefully, in his sleep. He left behind a notebook full of letters. One for me, one for Jamie, one for Andrew, and one for Curtis. I read them all. His letter to me said, "I spent too long pretending silence was safety. You proved me wrong. I'm proud of the man you became." I didn't know how much I needed those words until I saw them written in his shaky handwriting. We scattered his ashes on the hill where he used to take us sledding as kids. It was snowing, light and quiet. Jamie stood beside me, his key tattoo visible under his glove. Andrew held Hope in his arms. We didn't say much. We just stood there, letting the past rest where it belonged. Afterward, we went home. Not to the old house. It had been sold the year before, but to the Curtis House headquarters. The place we built. The place where this story truly belongs. We held a small ceremony. Lit a candle. Hung a framed photo of Curtis in the front lobby. And beneath it, we added a quote he once scribbled in a margin of one of his reports. Just 4 words, but they stayed with me. Truth is worth everything. Because it is. It cost us our comfort, our peace, our illusions. But it gave us freedom. It gave us each other. It gave us a new legacy. Not one built on silence, but one built on purpose. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt trapped by the weight of your family's past, hear this. You are not your father's choices. You are not your mother's silence. You are not the secrets you were never supposed to know. You are what comes next. And sometimes, what comes next is better than anyone imagined. Because sometimes, a boy finds a key in a basement and ends up unlocking the truth that saves a family.